Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Joining us now as we jump from the end of net neutrality advisories from the FCC to the tax reform as we welcome in 2018 with a whole new outlook on taxes. Joining us next, President of the group American Commitment, Phil Kerpen. Phil, welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you, sir, and Happy New Year.
I'm doing great, Joe. Happy New Year to you.
So take us inside the tax reform package. You've called it a triple victory for the American people, and I want to see if your views of it are similar to some of the other folks that I've talked to regarding, first and foremost, freeing up the economy, but moreover to each one of us on the consumer end of us. Talk to us about this triple victory.
Well, I call it a triple victory because it's an enormous positive, in my view, on three separate issue areas. Tax reform itself, on tax, of course, but also on health care and energy. And, in any other circumstance, if Congress repealed the Obamacare individual mandate, we would be talking about that as a massive accomplishment in its own right. Mm-hmm. And if Congress opened Anwar for oil drilling, something they've been trying to do for 37 years since it was originally designated for energy production in 1980, we'd be talking about that as a massive legislative accomplishment. And those were both sort of tacked on to this huge historic tax reform, the biggest tax reform in 31 years. And so a Congress that had done very, very little all year up to that point did really three enormous things all in one in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that's why I called it a triple victory. The tax cut proper, the impact on most people, it's going to be considerable in two ways. First of all, they're going to get pretty major direct tax relief for the vast majority of the American people. 80 to 90% of households are going to see a substantial cut of, $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 in their tax liability, which is, a couple $100 a month. Mm-hmm. It's going to show up in their paycheck starting next month when withholding resets for February. And towards that end, I would recommend that as soon as the new W-4 withholding form is available, and it's still not, but I hope that IRS will get it done this week or, if not this week, the next week. I certainly hope by then it'll be done. You got to fill that out and make sure your withholding is going to be accurate for February. Otherwise, it could be inaccurate. You want to get that tax cut right in your paycheck starting in February. So fill out a new withholding form as soon as it's available. It's not available yet. That is one way people will see it. But the other thing is I really think we're going to start seeing strong wage growth. And, for the whole Obama presidency, wages were really flat. It was about 0.5%, the annual increase. In the first year under President Trump, it was about 2.5%, so it was a little bit better. But I think we're going to see even stronger wage growth than that now because you got this big tax cut on the business side. It's going to make America much more competitive. You're going to see a lot more investment in the United States and a lot more opportunity. And employers that don't give raises are going to lose all their best people to people who are paying more and to other competitors who are started and so forth. And so I think that people are going to find that it's going to be a much more competitive economy with higher economic growth and a lot more opportunity. And you're either going to be able to get a raise where you're working now, or if your boss is, whatever reason, refusing to give a raise, you're going to be able to find something else better that pays better. And there's just going to be a lot more opportunity. And so I think the tax bite's going to go down for most people. And there's a pretty good calculator. It's not my website, but I recommend it. It's taxplancalculator.com. If you want to see the direct benefit to you, the direct tax relief benefit to you of this tax cut bill. But I also think there's going to be a lot more opportunity and therefore higher wages for most people. So that's going to be a double win in itself on the tax piece. And then, of course, the Obamacare mandate is repealed effective 2019. I hope the Trump administration will use some kind of transition relief for administrative action to try to accelerate that into 2018. But at a minimum, come 2019, the Obamacare mandate's going to be gone. And, you're not going to see the impact of that oil production right away because there's a long lead time to when that oil actually comes out of the ground. But one of the big arguments the Democrats make against domestic production every time we do have those high oil prices and we have $4 at the pump, they say, it's going to take too long to do anything, take too long to come to market. Well, we're going to get that started. And hopefully we're going to have that money flowing by the next time we are in an acute price spike situation in order to blunt that. And so it really is a positive on all three fronts, in my judgment, for the American people.
Phil Kerpen from American Commitment on with us on the tax reform bill. The I want to begin where you broke it down in so many ways, but one that I don't think is getting a nearly enough run is that wage growth. And it was something that I think helped President Trump carry Michigan and Pennsylvania with Democrats. And everyone forgets about the fact that the victory margin for President Trump in the 2016 election was from Democrats moving over and being apparently grown tired of being told it'll get better after the next election. And seeing that competitive marketplace of businesses both having the access to venture capital again to start growing, but also a better tax landscape for them to operate within the country as well, competing for that American job market. Because you talk about competition being good for prices, but it's also good for wages on the other end, because skilled labor of any kind, even in a grocery store, if there's more people out there shopping and the need for your skills goes up, you can command more money on your end of the economy.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really the whole key to the business side of this. And you see the liberals and the Democrats saying that these are just tax cuts for big business and they're not going to benefit people. And I think that the immediate reaction that we saw, especially in the banking industry, where over almost every bank out there announced big year-end bonuses and increases in starting wages and increases in pension contributions at the end of the year, and a lot of other non-banks did the same thing. And I think it's very clear that the benefits of the business side of this bill are going to be passed on in higher wages. And a lot of people, you hear this pushback from people. They say, well, no, my boss is too greedy. It's going to go in his pocket, or it's going to go to shareholders. It's not going to come into wages. And I think that, first of all, we've got a huge amount of evidence from so many countries all over the world that have cut business taxes, and it almost always leads to wage increases. And so we've got an enormous body of empirical evidence that suggests to the contrary, that won't happen. But also, in a competitive economy, a boss that doesn't pass on this business tax relief in the form of higher wages is going to lose all of the best workers to competitors.
Yeah.
Or the workers themselves will go start a new competitor, because we're going to be in a much friendlier environment for new business startups as well. And so it's not that companies want to do bonuses and raises out of the goodness of their heart. It's that in a competitive economy, if they do not, when everyone got the same tax relief, they're going to lose out to competitors, and they're going to falter in the marketplace as a consequence of not paying people what they're worth. And so I think the wage benefits are actually going to, over time, be much larger than the direct tax relief on the individual side in this bill, because we're going to be so much more competitive internationally than we have been, and just there's going to be so much of an incentive to locate production in the United States instead of continuing to move it abroad. And so I think the business side of this bill, Kevin Hassett, the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, estimated that the business side of this bill will increase wages for the average American household between $4,000 and $9,000. So
beyond just
you're talking
the
about
tax
getting
break.
$1,000 or $2,000 in the direct tax relief, and then getting a wage jump, over the next couple of years of $4,000 to $9,000. That's going to end up being actually the bigger impact of this bill if they're right about that estimate.
And if managed correctly, and again, that's something I don't think any of us are going to hold our breath for, but if the government manages its business correctly, that could close deficits, not increase them, because the static scoring that folks like Mark Warner and Tim Kaine are running around waving in front of everyone with a TV camera is based on the idea that if everything stays exactly as it is right now, this tax cut will increase the deficit. But you're talking about impacts, and of course that extra money in everybody's pocket then becomes stuff they're not just going to leave it in the bed stuffed in the mattress. They're going to go out and either do remodels on their home or buy something, and it creates economic volatility that then increases tax revenues in and of itself.
This bill will pay for itself. Mark it down. I'm telling you right now, it will pay for itself. It may not pay for itself dollar for dollar, but it will pay for itself in terms of growing GDP such that the burden of government on the economy will not be larger. And that's really what matters, is the percent. When people talk about the national debt, it's not the dollar figure that matters. It's the dollar figure as a percentage of the overall economy that matters, because the economy has to finance the payments on that debt. And if the economy is larger, but proportionally larger, or is let me say this, so excuse me for stumbling on my words a little bit.
No.
If we're growing the denominator faster than the numerator, when we talk about the percentage of the economy that the debt is, then we're in a better financial shape as a country than we were before. And I fully believe that this bill will grow GDP more than it grows the national debt. And I think that if you look at the Joint Committee on Taxation analysis, the dynamic analysis, it was sort of the official one, where they said that it would pay for about a third of the dollar cost of the bill. First of all, they had an assumption in their model, which is a completely incorrect assumption. It said this in their report. They said, we believe the Federal Reserve will massively increase interest rates as soon as wages pick up to stamp out the economic growth, and therefore the bill will only pay for about a third of itself in dollar terms. Well, the Fed has already said they will not do that. They're going to be looking at the same 3 or 4 rate hikes regardless of this bill. This has no impact on their outlook. And so that assumption was false, the idea that the Fed is going to slam on the brakes and we were going to have higher interest rates, which would stamp out the benefits of the tax cut, which was the assumption by which joint tax said that the bill would not pay for itself. That assumption is false. Second, even if the Fed tried to jack rates way up to slam the brakes on the economy, the Fed has very limited ability to affect real interest rates anyway in a world that's awash in capital. If the U.S. is an attractive place to invest and money is flooding into the country, we're going to have low interest rates even if the Federal Reserve tried to increase them, which they said they wouldn't. And so the interest rate assumption in the joint tax report is completely incorrect, and that was the reason they said they would only in dollar terms pay for about a third of itself. The more realistic models, such as the Tax Foundation model or the Lawrence Kotlikoff model, they show the revenue reflows will be about twice what joint tax thinks. So the bill in dollar terms will pay for about 2/3 of itself, not 1/3 of itself. And if that's correct, if it's about 2/3 of itself in dollar terms, then it is fully paid for in terms of percentage of GDP because of the level of growth we're going to have in the economy. And so my expectation, based on, I believe, the most realistic assumptions data we have, is that this bill will not increase the debt as a percentage of the U.S. economy. It will increase the growth in the economy more than it increases the debt, and therefore it will make the debt more manageable, not less.
Phil Kerpen is on with us this week on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And Phil, we've been talking to you for probably all 10 years this program's existed. Now with American Commitment, would you have ever wondered in all the other organizations you've headed up with this dedication to trying to get beyond just think tank methodology and actually seeing rubber meets the road prosperity moving forward, that maybe we just needed somebody like President Trump who seems disconnected from the average politician's urge or need to be loved and be loved and therefore get along to go along to get some of these things done. Do you ever look back wistfully on all those years we've been talking through all the different groups you've been part of, that now we finally have got something with real substance to it?
Yeah, it really has been a very gratifying first year of the Trump administration because so many of the things that we've been saying and talking about sort of in the think tank world, we're now seeing put into practice. And that's very gratifying after working on a lot of these ideas for so many years. And I'll tell you, really, for me, the single most satisfying day of the past year was the day that President Trump announced that he was withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord. And I was the honor to be invited to that Rose Garden ceremony. And I was sitting there listening to this speech, and the president was saying all of the things that I say and that my colleagues in the think tank world say about how this deal was a ripoff of the United States, and that's why the rest of the world was in favor of it, and it wouldn't accomplish anything for global warming. It would just transfer our wealth abroad. And you're hearing these words that you've said so many times and you've heard your colleagues and friends say so many times, but now they're coming out of the mouth of a president of the United States who's willing to stand up to all of elite opinion, every world leader, everyone in the media, and just say flat out what he believes is true, which in that instance is what I believe is true. Yeah. And we've seen that on so many of these other policy areas, and I think that's why the left is driven so insane by him. I mean, part of it is his sort of over-the-top shoot from the hip style on Twitter and all of that, which, I don't always love myself, to be honest. But I think a lot of it is just that he's willing to sort of reject the elite consensus on so many of these policy issues, and And I think that's a good thing, a very good thing. And we're going to see, we've seen a very productive year in terms of deregulation, tax cuts, all of the things that I think are going to get the economy moving in a high-growth mode again. And, I'm very optimistic about where the country is right now, notwithstanding all of the political turmoil.
I want to talk about healthcare and Anwar, your other two prongs of this, but quickly on a political level, though, Phil, does this make the American left dangerous in the fact that they feel like there's a very small window for them to score any victories before the average American starts saying, hey, I am doing better than I was in 2016, and let's stay the course, and maybe give President Trump more help?
Yeah, I think they've got a huge problem because they went so over the top with the attacks on this bill in the media and everything else, and they sort of went all in to try to stop it from passing, and they made such ridiculous claims that they convinced the majority of the American people that this bill raises their taxes, and that lie is going to crash very hard into reality here next month, in fact, when withholding tables reset and people see the tax bite go down and the take-home pay go up. And, of course, if there's strong wage growth on top of that, I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Democrats to explain why they said, Nancy Pelosi said it was Armageddon. You got all these Democrats saying this is going to raise your taxes. People are going to see that it cuts them and it leads to higher wages. I think Democrats have sort of painted themselves into a corner now. That said, the economy's been pretty strong, and yet the president's approval ratings are very low. And, I think they're trying to make the president so culturally toxic. So, something polite people just don't do is support President Trump in so many areas of the country, particularly sort of the suburban areas. And in your state, that's all of Northern Virginia, as we saw in the gubernatorial election. So they're going in on this strategy of kind of trying to separate the normal fundamentals from sort of this anti-Trump hysteria and try to ride that to victory in the elections. I don't think that it will work for them if the economy is going really well and this bill is really successful. But I don't know for sure because we're in sort of this new era of just total political polarization. And, I don't know if college-educated voters are going to find it culturally acceptable to vote for President Trump, even if everyone's doing well economically. So I don't know. I mean, it's pretty clear what the Democrats' strategy is. The economic fundamentals should, in theory, overcome it, but I'm just not sure what will happen.
Well, it's on the politicians that are running for these offices to make that case as well, Phil. On the subject of Anwar, we've often said when times are good, I made this, Bob McDonnell was on this radio show with me, and I said, well, things are good. Isn't this the time to cut taxes when things are growing and things are doing well? Shouldn't we be cutting taxes now, not looking at ways to increase it? And it always seems like we always discuss things like tax cuts when the economy is in trouble. But here with Anwar, I think we're taking this opportunity that we're energy independent. We're generating lots of energy through lots of different means out of the Dakotas and things. When most would say, well, then let's not worry about Anwar. We're doing fine without it. But this is exactly the time to do it, not wait until there's a crisis, correct?
Well, it's interesting. We've been trying to, as I said, the 1002 area of Anwar is called the 1002 area because it was Section 1002 of a 1980 bill that originally set it aside for oil and gas exploration and production. Then there was a big USGS survey in the 80s, and they found this resource is around 10 billion barrels, and, they usually lowball these things. So this is a massive resource. Production is going to be, 1.5 million, maybe 2 million barrels a day, which is, larger than all the imports we get from Saudi Arabia. It's a very large resource. And yet the Democrats made it this sort of symbolic fight that, because Anwar has the words wildlife refuge in it, they acted like this was going to be devastating to the environment if we actually produce there. Of course, it's actually a frozen tundra with almost no wildlife to speak of, notwithstanding the name, and the footprint that we're talking about for development is 2,000 acres in a 20 million acre refuge. But nonetheless, they imbued it with all of this symbolic significance, and they stymied us time after time after time. Bill Clinton vetoed it in 1995. Then the House passed it a bunch of times. It was blocked in the Senate. Then 2005, the Senate finally passed it. It's blocked in the House. It's just been a never-ending saga. And what the Democrats always do, to your point, is when prices spike and the barrel price is 100 plus and prices at the pump are $4, and we're saying we want Anwar, they say, well, there's no point because it'll take 10 years to get that oil to market, and by then, this this price spike will be over, so it's pointless. It won't do anything. And they lean very heavily on that argument. When we have these high price situations, we want to open Anwar. They say, well, it's going to take too long. Well, we need to get started now, so that oil will be flowing the next time there's a supply disruption or OPEC tries to ratchet down production and go with a high price strategy or economic fundamentals change. We need to start now when prices are relatively normal so that we aren't vulnerable to another price shock in the future where they'll say, oh, well, it'll take too long. And so, that's the excuse that the left always uses when people are really feeling the pain. They say it'll take too long to bring a new resource online, but that's all the more reason to
start
get
now.
Things moving when we're not in an acute price situation.
Does it also, as we watch things happening in the Middle East, we are watching with kind of real curious view of what's happening in Iran and what direction that's going, and Pakistan, and when the Middle East continues to be volatile and we have friends that need oil as well, doesn't this, as Russia did with its natural gas production, reestablish our place as if we're out there fighting for human rights and independent republics, as an opportunity to say, hey, listen, we've got all these resources. If you want to break away from these other countries and go the way of freedom and human rights and rule of law, we can back you up. Nobody's going to cut you off from any supply of oil because we've got it too.
Yeah, that's very important. U.S. energy production is very important for geostrategic as well as economic reasons. And towards that end, one of the other very important things that's going on is, we're finally starting to see the approvals of natural gas export terminals under this administration, which were all blocked under President Obama. And that's going to give us the ability, if there are supply disruptions in Europe, if the Russians shut off the pipelines, we'll be able to replace the critical natural gas supplies in Europe with U.S. production, and having more oil production also has huge strategic benefits. In the case that we have a military conflict, we can supply our own military equipment. In the case that OPEC tries to wield an oil weapon against us economically, we can withstand that much better if we've got more domestic production. And of course, as you pointed out, we can also supply allies when it's critical to do so as well. And so it's not just the economic benefits, but there are also tremendous security benefits of having expanded U.S. production of energy.
And Phil, last part of your triumvirate on the tax reform plan is healthcare. We just amazingly watched Terry McAuliffe sign a law permitting direct primary care associations in Virginia, which is amazing that he did it. I don't know if he needed something or maybe he was looking the other way, but he signed it, and now we can have them in Virginia. My health insurance just went up 20%, so my 8% tax cut still is offset by a 20% healthcare cost increase. So it's going to be dulled a little bit. But by 2019, if we see more of these direct primary care associations and other ways forward where the marketplace is coming up with ways to afford insurance, number one, insurance companies are going to have to compete in that landscape. But even without insurance companies, we should be able to go forward.
Yeah, this is really huge that they were able to get the individual mandate tax repealed in this bill, because we're seeing a lot of deregulatory efforts from the Trump administration. They've got an association health plan rule that should be published any day now. They've got another rule on short-term limited duration insurance, which is going to make those products much, much more robust and much more of an alternative to traditional insurance for people. And we're seeing a huge growth, as you pointed out, in direct primary care arrangements where people just pay their doctors directly as opposed to going through insurance. And the problem with all of these things, if the penalty tax had stayed in place, these are not Obamacare compliant plans and approaches, and therefore people who availed themselves of all these new options, if the penalty tax had still been in place, would have had to pay a hefty penalty tax on top of that, $695 or 2.5% of adjusted gross income, whatever the greater of those two is. That makes the economics of these other options much less attractive. You have to pay a hefty penalty tax on top of that. And so while I would have preferred Congress had gotten the votes to get their more comprehensive repeal and replace done earlier in the year, the fact that they were able to get the individual mandate tax repealed is massive, because it opens the path towards deregulatory efforts in the federal administration and at the state level that will allow people to have non-Obamacare alternatives that don't meet the Obamacare definition of insurance without having to worry about paying that hefty tax.
Yeah.
So I see that as an enormous victory for health reform, even if it's somewhat less than what a lot of us would have liked to see. It is a huge, huge victory on health care after it looked like we were going to see nothing accomplished for most of the year.
Phil, thank you so much for your visit. Lead-off batter for 2018 on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. AmericanCommitment.org is where people can read more about it. And thank you again so much for your time.
My pleasure, Joe. Have a good one.
Thank you very much. And thanks again to Jesse Hathaway from the Heartland Institute as well. I hope you're basking in this. It's put up or shut up time. We've been talking about this for 10 years. The freedom and the prosperity is there if we can grab it. It's for all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.